Hi listeners, this is Al Barris with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and today we're talking about freshwater mussel conservation.
Freshwater mussels are easy to miss. They're nondescript, they're often mistaken for rocks, and they sometimes spend decades undisturbed, surrounded by mud and gravel. And while they stay out of sight, they're vital to ecosystems. They remove silt and bacteria from our water, which improves the quality and clarity. They're often compared to canaries in the coal mine, but for rivers. If water quality is low, they will close their shells and stop filtering. With over 70% of North American mussels listed for protection or concern, this is troubling news. Biologists speculate that a century of habitat alteration in the forms of dams and industrial water diversion and chemical runoff from agriculture have brought these freshwater bivalve mollusks to the brink. The Texas hornshell, for example, was recently listed for protection under the Endangered Species Act. It's native to the Rio Grande watershed, and it's the last remaining native mussel species in New Mexico. Texas's other watersheds are also seeing steep declines in native mussel populations. The state is home to over a dozen protected mussel species whose numbers have dwindled in recent decades. But there's hope coming in the form of research from scientists at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service San Marcos National Fish Hatchery. Located between San Antonio and Austin, they're optimistic and hard at work on the cutting edge of mussel science. They're developing conservation techniques to help strengthen the wild populations of these subtle but ever so vital shellfish.
My name is Josh Abel. I'm a biological science technician with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in San Marcos, Texas. I work at the San Marcos Aquatic Resources Center, and I'm part of the invertebrate amphibian ecology and conservation research program there. So right now we're currently working with 5 species native to Central Texas: Texas pimpleback, Texas fat mucket, Texas fawn's foot, smooth pimpleback, and false spike. 4 of those species are currently candidates for federal protection, and 1 more is proposed for listing. We're also currently working with the newly endangered Texas hornshell, which is found in the Rio Grande drainage.
Part of what makes freshwater mussels unique is their means of reproduction. Since adult mussels can't move, they send their offspring away to begin their lives as travelers, stowing away aboard an unwitting vessel.
Mussels start out their life basically as parasites, so they're parasitic to fish in their earliest life stage. The larval mussels, they're known as glaucidia, and they lack most of the anatomical features of an adult mussel. So when the female is gravid, she basically will release the glaucidia and they attach to fish gills. And while they're attached to the fish host, they're obtaining nutrients from the fish's tissue and blood plasma while they're undergoing metamorphosis to become an actual mussel.
Many mussel species' pregnant female will entice a host by mimicking other organisms, luring them close enough for her to spray glaucidia in the fish's face. Other species will produce a glob of goo called conglutinate that the fish will ingest.
I mean, from a life history standpoint, it's pretty fascinating adaptation. So these are animals that are basically sessile, meaning they don't move around much throughout their life. And they develop this way to have their young transported distances that, just wouldn't be possible if they didn't have a host fish. Also, the ways in which they attract their specific hosts are absolutely awesome. Some mussels use lures, which are actually part of their mantle tissue that mimic minnows, crayfish, etc., just whatever their host fish would like to eat. And others produce conglutinates, which mimic all sorts of food sources for their specific hosts. So the host fish attractants are really where these animals that spend their life emulating a rock let their charisma really show through.
A major theme of the hatchery's research is developing science so that other hatcheries can breed the mussels. This is called propagation. And to do this, they need to learn to maintain a kind of Noah's Ark for the mussels. By keeping a genetically diverse representation in captivity, which is called a refugia, they have a fail-safe in case a wild population were to disappear. And while the San Marcos hatchery isn't specifically meant as a refugia site, they're developing breeding and refugia techniques that will be free to any hatchery interested in making a mussel refugia. And from the refugia, the mussels can eventually be transplanted to restored river sections in need of these filter-feeding water canaries. The tricky part is getting the habitat back to how it was. Mussels are indiscriminate filter feeders. They ingest anything that's in the water. And so they're very sensitive to river bottom conditions. Since they can't move, they're really at the mercy of their neighbors' habits. Each mussel species needs a specific habitat. If conditions change too much, they can't survive. Survival factors for mussels include how fast the water flows, the water's chemistry, different contaminations, water temperature, and the amount of silt. If there's too much silt, then they'll suffocate. Is there enough water flowing year-round? Many southwestern rivers dry up because of drought and industrial diversion. These conditions that can kill them are called limitations. Learning limitations is a major part of research for San Marcos biologists. Knowledge of these conditions is necessary before they can restore each species back to their original range.
Most extirpations that have happened and are continuing to happen with all taxa of animal are mostly because of habitat loss. So that's the obvious correction that needs to be made before any restocking efforts going to be successful. Water quality and water quantity are also concerns that need to be addressed. The limitations of life history studies can really help elucidate if parameters are suitable for restoration in that area.
Mussel conservationists hope to restore mussels to their old habitats from hatchery refugia. However, they must first assess what caused the mussels to disappear in the first place. This is called extirpation.
Yeah, so it's really just going to be correcting those problems. There should be a smoking gun of what caused the extirpation of that population to begin with. A lot of these rivers are highly urbanized. So you're also talking there about water quality. So whatever the issue may be, whether it be a historic sewage treatment plant before standards were as high as they are today is a likely culprit. So it's making sure that those issues are corrected.
Mussels live decades-long lives, and it takes years for them to breed in the wild. So their conservation and reintroduction takes a really long time.
Basically, you put a mussel back in the river in a cage system where you can go back and find them, and you just monitor their survival, growth, and health over time. In some of these species, it takes several years for them to reach sexual maturity, so you might not know that your efforts have paid off for several years, close to a decade.
The road to mussel recovery isn't going to be overnight, and the work isn't easy, but the outcome is well worth the effort.
Anytime you're restoring a population, in my opinion, that's a victory in and of itself. You're returning things to the way they're supposed to be. But in addition to that, mussels are also important in further restoration. So not only are they the goal of restoration, but they're a tool that can be utilized for restoration.
The effect of reintroducing native mussels into any ecosystem will have positive effects that radiate into the surroundings, and they encourage the recovery of the rest of the system.
Their presence, improves water quality. They can filter a tremendous amount of water. Adults of larger species can filter in excess of 30 gallons a day per mussel. They also help stabilize bank substrate, as well as transfer nutrients from the water column to the river bottoms.
The set of challenges presented to mussel biologists in the American Southwest are especially unique.
Here in the Southwest, we have a really unique group of ecosystems. If you look from basically east to west, you're talking eastern Texas to western Arizona. Those are as starkly different as you could possibly get in this country.
Scientists at San Marcos are very much on the frontiers of fish biology. So much is still unknown for freshwater shellfish in this region, so it's still like the Wild West for them.
We're really at the cutting edge for what's known at a lot of those habitats. So mussel work here is probably equivalent to where fish research was, 100 years ago, which that's incredibly exciting as a scientist. And it's also great to introduce people to this entire taxa of animal that they know little about and kind of show them the importance of them in our region. So I guess my point is that hopefully mussel restoration in this area will be a success and that folks can witness and be a part of it in the coming decades.
That was Josh Abel in San Marcos, Texas, talking about mussel conservation for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. My name's Al Barris, and that's what's up.